Hi there, and welcome to the final session of Cambium Connections event. And this is the executive Q&A panel. And we've got 5 panelists, 2 of them, Anthony and Scott, you've already heard from this morning. And so I'll just sort of quickly say we also have Brian Shepek, who's the SVP of Global Sales. We've got Biju Kunju, who's the VP of Engineering in India. And we've then got Raymond de Graaf, who's SVP of Operations. And so first off, again, as before, there is a Q&A text entry panel underneath the video if you want to put in questions. But I'd quite like to push out a poll straight away, and we'll come back and get the panel to come up with responses in a few minutes. And so you should see a poll pop up on your screen that's looking at what do you see as the main obstacle to expanding wireless connectivity to meet demand. Is it bandwidth? Is it funding, technology, regulatory, other? We can certainly address some of those concerns as well as we go through. So I'd like to sort of turn to the panel, and Scott, I think you can direct questions as you see appropriate to relevant people. One thing we haven't talked about that much is about the home and the management of networks in the home. I mean, we all got multiple devices, multiple screens, particularly with working from home. We may have many more people and active devices as well as entertainment than we did in the past. How is that managed? What's changing?
Great question. And I know in my personal house with two teenage boys at home from university and home office with my wife, it's I can't imagine how many devices are actually attached to the network. But Biju, you've been spending a fair bit of time on our R series as well as the broader Wi-Fi portfolio. Why don't you give your perspective on that?
Sure. Thank you, Scott. And very relevant question. And if you look any home today, right, 2 parents and a couple of kids, at least 4 people in the home, 20-25 devices always connected to the internet, and all of them are doing something very critical. If you look at my home now, I'm doing my home work from home, and my kids attending the school, college from home, and it's very critical. And it is not like our olden days, okay, if you get Wi-Fi, it's okay, otherwise just forget it. That's no longer acceptable to the customers. So everything is critical. A good reliability is very critical to in the connectivity from the connectivity perspective. So one thing I want to mention is that customers are looking for a control of the network from their fingertip. When I say from their fingertip, usually it is using an app, right? So using the app, they should be able to see if my network is healthy. Am I getting the offered service with quality? Is somebody in my home overusing the network? For example, my son might use his use the full bandwidth for his games, which I cannot afford. Right? So all those aspects they should be able to control from their app. That's one aspect. Maybe I'll expand a little bit more. Right from the installation. So in today's world, today's home, you cannot cover the entire home with one AP. You need multiple AP there. So that means a typical home user should be able to create a kind of a home mesh very easily, I would say. Some using some visual indication. Okay, now you have a good mesh. There is no dead spots in anywhere in your home. Right, so that's an assisted mesh setup. Then speed test. Am I getting the service I'm offered? Right, they offered me 20 Mbps, 25 Mbps. Am I getting that? Right, am my device performing in that level? My phone's performing in that level or not? As an AP, is it performing in that level? Right, if it is not performing, what's the problem? One of the usual question I get from my mom is, I forgot my password. Right? So how do we solve those issues for typical home users? They are not very technical. right? They are going ahead with their regular life, and they have some typical questions. Normally, it's very easy. Now, whatever technology you introduce, it should be very easy for them, right? Then traffic prioritization is another thing. No, with the pandemic, I think Sakit also explained in the previous session that video became a very critical thing in the during the pandemic. We all saw that video is very important. So we need to, or from a work from home guy's perspective, video meeting, video conferencing is very important. So it is important to prioritize the traffic at that time in that device all the way to the internet. So those kind of things must be there in no, in the AP, and the application or the app we are talking about should be able to tune that. And
Yeah.
also from a ISP perspective or a WISP perspective, they should have a centralized control, right? They should not be, no, the ARPU is very less for a home user, but even then they have to solve all their issues. So without taking a call or without rolling the truck, they should be able to solve the problem. So we have our CN Maestro to take care of that, right? And they should increase the customer Wi-Fi experience. Again, Sakit I mentioned in the previous session that, now how do we sell more service to this customer? The moment we see, okay, this customer is kind of done with their, or the overusing the bandwidth, the next day they will get a mail of, guys,
Yeah.
you are using 25 Mbps of your 25 Mbps.
Yeah.
Now you have
But
to go to the next service.
I think we're going to have to move. Thank you for that, Viju. I think we're going to have to move on to the poll results at the moment. We'll come back to a couple of those management issues afterwards.
Yeah, Bijou, I think you got a little passion on that question. Good.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. So right, so that's interesting. Main obstacle, available bandwidth. That's interesting. It's not specific whether that's actually on the radio or whether it's backhaul, but the second one there being funding, and then, well, technology. That is quite general and other. But available bandwidth is the main obstacle. Now, that interesting question there is: does that mean more spectrum? Does that mean more backhaul, or does that mean more ability to deliver bandwidth to each customer? What's your take, Scott?
I'll take a crack at this one and then let the team add any additional comments. I'm going to interpret that first and foremost as spectrum. It is the biggest challenge has been access to adequate spectrum that can be then used to provide adequate capacity on the network or bandwidth. And I think if you go back in time 2 years, that was certainly a significant issue. Cambium, for the last 4 years, might be 5 years now, we've ran an annual survey of the global WISP community, and that consistently comes up as one of the primary challenges to growing their business is access to spectrum. But I think if you look more recently, there's been tremendous progress on the regulatory front around the world on access to new spectrum. The 150 megahertz of CBRS in the US is a great example, and that's being closely monitored and watched by regulatory bodies around the world on shared access spectrum. The opening up of 60 gigahertz is tremendous, particularly for urban networks and suburban network access, campus area networking. The 6 gigahertz that we spoke about earlier in the program agenda around the world, up to 1200 megahertz. So I think the regulatory body has recognized that wireless access, wireless networking is critical to today's society. Between the regulatory bodies, the industry, and the service providers and the end users, spectrum is becoming more available, and it's being exercised effectively, I believe, by the industry.
Right. Actually, do any of the other panelists have a view on that as well? I mean, what do you see as sort of obstacles and challenges at the moment? Raymond, maybe?
I'm very willing to give my perspective, but I don't think I'm the right person to. I think Brian or Bijou or Anthony have much better perspective on that.
Okay. Brian, anything? You're on mute.
On the funding side, I think, and Scott started to cover this, we're seeing a greater variety of funding sources at municipal levels, state levels, federal levels around the world. And so I do have a lot of confidence that with new commercial business models, as well as these subsidy programs from governments, we're gonna address that. We're gonna see that addressed on behalf of the people building networks.
That's interesting. So that's funding from the government side. I mean, are there also sort of private equity sources or other sources of funding that's looking at fixed wireless? Or clearly there's a lot of interest in other areas of wireless, like tower companies and private networks. But are you seeing any other funding sources emerge?
Well, we do see it on the typical financing side, but that's sort of opportunistic. It varies by market, by region, by customer type. Those opportunities. But I think the trend that's more notable is the digital agenda of governments around the world, resulting in funding of various programs, especially in rural broadband.
That's really interesting. So between the rural broadband funding spectrum, it sounds like there's a central role of sort of government and policymakers here. What else would you like to see? And I guess, to be honest, what can the community, what can people who are on the call actually do to help nudge that in the right direction?
My response to that is be engaged at the local level. Be engaged with the regulatory bodies. Are you monitoring what's taking place within your country? Are you advocating for spectrum? Are you advocating for the use rules that are going to surround access to that spectrum? I think the other place, from a wireless standpoint, there's often a predisposition to a fiber first mentality. And to the degree that you can influence awareness within the regulatory bodies, the legislative bodies within your country through your trade associations is important. It's not today. The saying is, if it can be done with wireless, it will be done with wireless, because of the flexibility and the agility of wireless. But it's not just spectrum being available. It comes to the use of that spectrum and the rules around it. Likewise, on the funding side that Brian was mentioning, if the funding that's being made available directly or indirectly restricts use of wireless, then that funding hasn't done us any good. So I think first and foremost, be engaged within your local community.
I mean, certainly one of the things I see is a lot of political programs. Sometimes they're very specific full fiber, rather than fiber or wireless. And so the UK has gone on, where I am, has gone on a journey where the original government policy was around full fiber, and then essentially it sort of morphed into gigabit broadband. And I'm not quite sure whether that was because of lobbying by the mobile industry or other groups. But I think there's also another thing, which is that you'll sometimes find governments try to ring fence budget for 5G. Now, to be fair, often they don't. 5G for some politicians, when they're standing up, just means cool new wireless stuff. But we can't always be too precious about that. And what are other people seeing on the government and policy side?
If I may, Dean, I think you're right actually with the lobbying. We have actually been supporting a lot of groups within UK, but Europe as well, in making sure that we move away from funding just being fiber based, but for gigabit wireless or for to get throughput increases, and that's been really successful. By demonstrating that you can get these speeds, these throughputs, you can efficiently use spectrum to make wireless work. It does change government's attitude.
I mean, I'm certainly seeing things there also, like some countries have test bed and trial programs where they're perhaps a little bit more open to innovators. Big push at the moment for having new suppliers as well. So I think that's sometimes a way to sort of you make the political realm see beyond this sort of binary of, well, it's either 5G or it's fiber, and to actually realize there's a sort of the term I use is network diversity and biodiversity rather than monoculture, to sort of essentially align with some of the thinking on environmental protection as well. Okay. So what are we seeing on the enterprise and industrial side of things? And also, what is Cambium doing to address that? There's a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. So where are we at the moment with industrial use? We've talked about it. And how do we see that going forward, and sort of what's happening from your side with the enterprise dedicated offerings?
Well, I would say, first of all, the industrial markets have always been significant consumers of wireless networking infrastructure, and I see that accelerating. But Brian, from your standpoint, looking globally at the various vertical markets we're engaged in, your thoughts on the industrial markets?
Sure. Well, I think we're getting a new, no pun intended, a new wave of activity with our industrial customers with the CN Wave product. The versatility of that product, the fact that it can be deployed point to multi-point, or mesh. Obviously, it's high speed, shorter range, very relevant if you're in a mining pit, if you're in a rail yard, if you're in a port, if you're in a manufacturing facility, even agricultural processing centers. So, obviously it's a service provider. There's a set of service provider applications for that product, and especially exciting to move into metro areas. But I think the industrial and campus networking applications are going to give even further relevance to that new product line.
And Brian, often those environments are also the ones that are being targeted by the sort of 5G private cellular community as well. What's the sort of the appropriate way to think about the mix and match of those different technologies? Maybe you use one that's inside the factory and another for the outdoor area or to connect the buildings. How do you present that?
Well, certainly at Cambium, we talk a lot about our fabric, right? And fabric has a lot of different dimensions to it, indoor and outdoor, narrow band all the way up to gigabit, very wide band speeds. So there's, I would say, an OpEx versus CapEx dynamic to private networking versus, buying services from a public carrier. And usually that's the financial ramifications of that and the preference for the end customer is what drives those decisions. But we're just trying to give them more and more options for that private networking side.
I mean, it's interesting. When I'm starting to see all these other new classes of service provider emerge as well, which are the sort of maybe the tower companies. It could be a utility company that's becoming a service provider. There's even municipalities in some places that are deploying their own infrastructure and offering it either a wholesale to other ISPs or to particular constituencies, I don't know, schools and hospitals or something. Are you seeing that's all those sort of grey areas get darker grey, if you like?
Absolutely. We have historical WISP customers becoming systems integrators. We have systems integrators becoming MSPs. So we see all flavors and evolutions and versatility within our customers. They're a pretty creative bunch. They have a lot of RF skill, and they apply that in as many different business models and technical models as they can think of. And we see new ones every month.
What's been, obviously we're now hopefully getting towards the end of the worst part of the pandemic. But what have been the changes beyond the obvious? And how can we see things progressing over the next year or two? Are we starting, for example, on residential? Are we starting to see some homes have both fixed and wireless broadband for a backup? I mean, I've been thinking about. I'm using wired broadband at the moment, but I was thinking about getting fixed wireless as a fallback. Is that a typical strategy you can see?
I think the first thing, and maybe it's part of the obvious, is the criticality of reliable broadband in the home. And I think around the world, there was a lot of homes that relied on mobile devices as their primary conduit to broadband access. They'd set them up for tethering, or maybe that was their primary interface. And that worked fine for periodic utilization, when I'm at home, but I'm only at home, a limited number of hours per day, and I'm only interacting with it a limited amount of time. Well, that flipped, right? Now you're heavily dependent on your broadband. You're using it constantly, and the reliance on the mobile network and the latency embedded in that network and the tolling costs associated with that, I think, came to the forefront. And I think residents around the world recognized I need reliable broadband access. And at the same time, there's momentum around cord cutting and reducing your reliance on some of the traditional fixed providers in that space. I do think, to your point, that redundancy is important. You can't function in today's society in many cases, as Bijou was commenting earlier, the criticality of the access to the network. So if it's just like enterprises, they have a primary and they have diversity. What was the work office is now the home office. That need for diversity doesn't go away.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I was planning for this call and I've been on numerous others, and I was thinking, well, what happens if my broadband goes down? Can I tether my laptop to my phone? But then I'd probably have to do it upstairs because I'm in the basement, and the number of permutations get really complicated. And I definitely see service providers starting to offer work from home optimized broadband. So I think sometimes you'll find it'll be combined. It'll be fixed and wireless. It could be in the same box or separate one or bundled, or they'll sell one to your employer and they will give you a dedicated thing to put in the window. I think there's a lot of opportunity around that.
I agree.
I want to say the one thing that this pandemic has shown service providers is the need for rapid expansion of their networks and to reach the unconnected before. And I see that even as we get out of the pandemic, they're going to realize that actually is a superb way of doing it. Wireless offered them the solution, and they will continue to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of questions are also come in now. To what extent is Cambium impacted by supply chain constraints? I mean, I've been hearing an awful lot about semiconductor issues at the moment, sort of recently, that impact everything from automotive to telecom. So where is Cambium in that?
I think we have the perfect individual to answer that question. Raymond, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I will take that one. So thank you for that question, right? I think we're in unprecedented times. There's a number of constraints in the supply chain that are definitely impacting our ability to deliver in certain spots. The semiconductor is definitely a big one, especially seen in the news around the automotive industry, but also impacting the technology industry in a heavy way. The automotive industry semiconductor piece is really the older kind of technology. Like the newer technology is a little bit freer available. That's the Wi-Fi 6, for example. But it will take a while before we get out that. And you see that across the board, and we see that in our business with some of our main semi guys that we deal with. And we expect that to be in place throughout the year. And what that really means is that we just need to keep a key eye on the forecasting piece. We're getting our fair share, and what you've seen over the last couple of quarters that we've been able to deliver quite a bit of product, but there's going to be constraints in certain area, and we're working with our customers to get through that. But it's not only the semiconductor piece, right? What we're seeing, for example, in China right now is on the logistics side as well, which might be a little bit more shorter term, but there's obviously a container shortage in China, where people are trying to recover that, but it means that people that are trying to move product from China into other countries have to wait in queue before the containers are available. We're not seeing that only with our customers, right? That they're trying to move product from Shanghai to their end markets. We're seeing that also on the components that we need to move from our component suppliers to the factories. Another supply constraint is the AKM factory fire for crystals, TSCOs. In November, a factory caught fire that was doing a big piece of the global supply. We're trying to recover that, right, by sourcing different components, different sources. And I think we're pretty successful in that. But all of that is getting impacted as well by the higher demand that we're seeing. So what we've seen over the last couple of quarters coming out of the pandemic was a much more robust demand. You've seen it in our public announcements as well, right, in our revenues and all that stuff. I think we've been able to very successfully deliver to that. Having said that, the constraints that are being discussed here are impacting a couple of products and impacting a couple of customers, and it's very painful. And we're trying to work with them as much as we can, right? But the reality is that this situation will be in place for at least another couple of quarters, and we'll keep on monitoring what's happening around us, and we'll keep on communicating with all of our audience with regards to that. Maybe is there anybody that has other perspective or additional perspective?
I think you closed it, Raymond. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. One question that's cropped up here, which is actually crops up in all wireless discussions, which is around IoT security over wireless networks. I mean, yeah, I don't know whether you're in a position to sort of influence or comment on security dynamics. I mean, there's some amazing stuff that's come. I saw a presentation yesterday about quantum key distribution via satellite, which I think is probably a bit out of topic for this session. But I'm curious, what's your take on IoT security and wireless?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, it is top of mind from a development standpoint from the beginning of the architecture of the platform and maintaining it going forward. So the teams in Cambium in general spend an enormous amount of time thinking about security and ensuring our networks are secure. Anthony, you want to comment further on that? I think going back in time with FIPS and some of our other efforts, you in particular have some practical experience here.
Yeah, I think, well, we've taken our, we do military products, and we have in the past, and a lot of these demand wireless security and security of ports. And we take that knowledge and we take that rigor and put that into all our consumer goods as well. So, we do take that very seriously, and obviously keeping up to date with the latest standards, keeping up to date with both wireless and fixed wired connections is incredibly important for all our products.
Thank you. One thing I've been interested in is we haven't had many questions in, unlike the US, about satellite. And there's a lot of, in my view, hype, but also some interesting stuff going on there. Is that an area you're keeping an eye on, or is it adjacent and it's not really relevant?
So we are keeping an eye on it. It is prospectively disruptive to the traditional terrestrial networks. I think there's certainly a place for the low Earth orbit networks, and they're going to have success in certain circumstances. I would suggest for the traditional wireless internet service provider space, I think there's more hype than actual disruption that's going to take place there. And I think it's orientated around the actual cost of those services, the initial acquisition cost of the local infrastructure and the ongoing subscription costs associated with it. I think our WISPs are able to compete quite effectively on data rates. They're able to compete effectively with cost of service level agreements, what their service fees are going to be. And I would say even more importantly, they're local. They're local businesses engaged within the local community and able to provide superior customer service at a local level. And that carries a great deal of weight. So we are paying attention to it. I think I said earlier, competition breeds excellence. And when new competition comes on and brings new approaches to providing the services that are essential for today's society, we'll learn from that and progress.
Great, thanks. So we're getting towards the end of our time now. Any final comments that people have, or areas to keep an eye on for the next year or 2 years?
Sure. Why don't we go around and maybe a quick sentence from each of us? Bijou, you want to start off with a quick sentence?
Quick sentence, yeah. We do need to keep it quick.
Just wanted to add one sentence to what Scott said, right? On the LEO satellites. I think probably we will work together. There could be a hybrid solution where you reach in the difficult to reach area, and from there they will use Cambium gear. So there might be an area where we can work together.
Fantastic.
Anthony?
I think this wireless fabric is critical in today's use of wireless, being able to go right from backhauling into access into the house, and be able to provide a seamless way of doing that is essential to all the service providers.
Raymond?
You know, we're committed to get you all your products, right? If you can help us by giving us more visibility into that, then fantastic. Beyond that, we're working around the clock to make it all happen.
Brian?
I'll just part with a big thank you for your time and your attention today. And we have a tremendous appetite to engage with you in all the different forums and any forum you should choose, any messaging platform, et cetera. So reach out to us, tell us what's on your mind. Our thought leadership is rooted in our engagements with all of you. So thank you.
I'll give my 2 cents. All of us on this call are part of the wireless space, and I can't think that there's a more exciting place to be, either in developing new concepts or putting those concepts to use in networks. But what a wonderful time in society to be in this space, and it's fun, and we're doing good things, and we're benefiting from the things we're doing.
Absolutely agree. I think the only area that's perhaps slightly in advance of being a wireless analyst at the moment is if I was a vaccine analyst. But I think I'll be very happy with being number 2 on that as well. Yeah, so thank you all very much for this session. It's been really informative, and I'd like to thank you for your time. And at that point, I'd like to sign off and to say that on behalf of Cambium Networks, thank you for joining this event. I hope you found it interesting, thought-provoking. Feel free to follow up with anyone else and myself as well on particular topics if relevant. The platform that the session was running on will remain up for another week or so, and so you'll be able to re-watch presentations if you want. And then after that, the sessions will be posted on the Cambium YouTube channel. So if you haven't already done so, please also fill out the event survey online before you go. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you all. Thanks, Dean.
You have learned to talk, and also to remain silent and listen, to lay claim to your space, and to share it, to go far and discover the things that are closest to you, to change your mind, places, and habits. You have learned the importance of technology and respect for nature. You have learned that one is stronger when together, even when not in the same room. That one can finish first and also last. You have learned to be curious, to invent, and to discover. And you know that you will continue to do so. We do only one thing so that you can do many. Cambium Networks, wireless that just works.